We have with us today in Can You Take It, Neerja Chowdhury, a journalist of almost 36 years of experience. Neerja, you started in 1975 with Himmat Weekly. What was your early experience in Bombay?
I joined Himmat and worked with the weekly paper that was edited by Rajmohan Gandhi. And emergency had been declared. And Himmat was one of those few papers, you know, the censorship was resisted by many smaller papers. Of course, some big ones also like Indian Express, but many smaller papers. And it was really an exciting period because we would publish things, and the way we would handle it, the first months, it was very difficult for the censor actually to find fault. Then
Was that a strategy?
That was strategy. And then, of course, they began to hound us. Printing presses would not publish the paper. And I remember towards the end of the emergency, we had to go from one printing press to another, you know, every week a different one, as the press owners would be obviously intimidated.
But you know, I started India Today in 1975, and I don't know how it was in Bombay, in Mumbai, but before we could print it, there was a man called Dipenna who had to put a stamp on every page that it was okay. So it was actually physically censored before we could publish.
That's right. It used to go to the censor for this kind of clearance. But what was very exciting was that we decided then at the end of several weeks of this kind of treatment to appeal to our readers for money so that we could buy a small printing press of our own. And I remember putting a chart on the walls of Himmat, and money would come in, believe it or not, even 1 rupee. So many 1 rupee money orders that came in, and that every day the graph would go up of the money. And we had, I think, collected around 70,000 rupees, and we bought a small press. And we brought out the magazine through this press. Not great quality, but we got it out. You see, Himmat closed down in 1980 because there wasn't the money to keep it going. And that is the time when I realized that you could fight censorship of the government, but it was more difficult to fight the market forces. I joined the Statesman in 1982.
How many women were in the Statesman at that time?
There were women. I remember Nina Vyas was there. Shanaz Anklesaria Iyer came a little later. And there were ones and twos, but not...
And in the places that I worked, there were no women toilets. You would have to share it, and there'd be urinals, and it was really horrible.
No, Statesman had very good women toilets. And a paper that gave a lot of importance to sub-editing, for instance, you know, to getting it right, the style, you couldn't allow a mistake of spelling or having got the name of a person wrong. That was given huge importance.
And
so sub-editors,
it's so normal to get everything wrong and just shrug your shoulders.
That's right.
The other day on a TV channel, they had a photograph of Bill Clinton, and the story was about Bill Gates' house. So, you know, and as it is, Times Now has been sued by putting the wrong picture.
I must tell you this, you know, in Himmat, I'd written a piece about a wedding, and the groom, it was a high-profile wedding of somebody. So the groom was wearing, I wrote a silk kurta, and I was given a rocket because the person had been wearing a khadi kurta. And what a rocket, you know, that kind of mistake should never be made. So factually being correct was a very important
But we don't really have fact checkers. Like in the New Yorker, they have a fact checker that if somebody writes on, excuse me, somebody writes on a particular day in July, it was sunny, they'll check the weather report of that day to check if it was really sunny. They're so detailed.
Yeah.
But we've still got to get that element in.
Whereas, you know, it's much easier to check facts. Even
course,
with the Indian Express, which I joined subsequently, we would spend hours trying to find out how somebody's name was spelt. Subramaniam Swami is a case in point. You know
Yeah.
how he writes Subramaniam. It's with an M.
Yeah.
The background of a story, what had preceded it, it would take sometimes hours, sometimes days.
What was it like working under Arun Shuri?
Arun Shuri was really a very, very enterprising. And remember, this is a period when the anti-Rajiv Gandhi mood had set in. And then the paper really went to town in 1987 onwards, and the VP Singh movement, the buffers, all that was coming to the fore. And I had joined as, I wanted to write about politics. And since I had newly joined, I couldn't be given Congress party, so I was allotted this Jan Morcha of VP Singh that had just been launched as the junior most in the bureau. And
That turned out to be lucky.
Yes. That turned out to be the alternative, led to the alternative to the Congress party in 1989.
Do you think that journalists are now fair to the people they disagree with?
I think to begin with, I must say there are large numbers still in our profession that are fair to and try and be objective irrespective of their own ideological, political or personal inclinations. So I would say, and that, of course there is much larger group that don't do it than was the case earlier. That is also true. And number two, and this comes really over the years, where you begin to win their confidence and they talk to you about what is going on behind the scenes, to throw light on the why things are happening, how they are happening, not just what is happening. And this has become very important for print journalism, because as TV is now a medium on the record, print has become very much off the record medium. Your story starts where the TV story ends. And therefore, to have the confidence of people who are newsmakers is very important, because otherwise they will not give you information.
So you're saying that print now has the opportunity to go deeper, to expose more. It gives you the opportunity to show what is behind what is the shouting and screaming and the headline news on television.
That's right, and what may not what TV may not have captured, and the processes behind the event. To win somebody's confidence, for them to trust you with information that you will not reveal your source, it's not an overnight development. It takes years and years, particularly in politics, of building that rapport.
Would you say that when Barkha Dutt was talking to Nira Radia, a large part of the tapes were not released, I believe, and the tapes that were not released included Barkha asking and actually manipulating, trying to get an interview with Raja and Kanimosi. Do you think that when you saw the Nira Radia tapes, do you think it's valid that Barkha was trying to establish a confidence with her to get more to take her story further?
I think so. I would certainly look at it that way, knowing Barkha and the person she is. Of course, there's been a lot of controversy around that episode, but certainly knowing Barkha, I think she would want, to have the confidence. And you, in your profession, you are dealing with all kind of people. This is a PR person. You'll be dealing with people who are real crooked or have their own axe to grind, etc.
And you find yourself nodding to them.
Yes.
While talking to them, because you have to take them to a place where you'll get the interview.
Where you get the interview or you get the information, and yet not be beholden to them. Suppose a politician gives you news. You don't want to be in a position that they think because they give you news, therefore they have a right to tell you what to write.
But a lot of them do. There is this thing of loyalty has become a very strange element in journalism and politics.
You see, nobody will give you complete picture information. No matter how good they are, no matter how close they are to you, remember it's always going to be a selective. Therefore, you will have to do legwork and try and corroborate it to see the larger picture in which you contextualize that piece of information. That's what we are called to do.
And in television, they don't do it, we don't do it, and we don't need to do it because it's a bite.
It's a bite.
And you can, and you leave it
That's
to the
right.
viewer to decide whether you want to believe that person or not.
But even for print, you can fall into the trap of saying, okay, so be it, A, B, C, D is giving me information, so what if I peddle their line? Or you can choose no. I had in VP Singh era, there was somebody who's still a very major player who told me once he'd written a letter to VP Singh disagreeing, and it was I'd got to know that there was this letter. It had gone to 8-9 people, senior people in the Janata Dal, and I asked him. So he said he'd in the past given me information like that, but he said, I'm not going to give it to you this time. I said, okay, you go and get it from somebody else. I said, okay, I will get, and I managed to get that letter from somebody else. So it meant, you needed to have not one source, but you needed to have 20 sources, which meant a lot of legwork, a lot of hard work of getting to people, meeting them, winning their trust to be able to get information. And I think that's, even though, your recognition of what you stand for, the stories you do may be slower, at the end of the day, I would prefer it that way. And what I prize today is a credibility, which I think is the most prized possession of any journalist.
Now, where journalism's credibility is at an all-time low because of selling of editorial space, even in the main paper, planted stories from one corporate house against another, a political party against another, a politician against another, interdepartmental plants. I mean, very often you're reading a newspaper and just looking at all the plants in the story, whereas the layperson just reads it flat and accepts it with the suspension of disbelief. Today, people are reading the newspapers or watching the news with great cynicism.
No, that's true. We used to go even in the rural areas earlier, election coverage or what, and people would say, but I read this in the paper, this was in the newspaper. It meant it had to be gospel truth because it was in the newspaper. Now when you travel around, people say, newspaper, they're like that.
In fact, if you quote a newspaper, people treat you as if stop being naive.
You see, we get information which comes within the system to which we do not have access. When I say thieves fall out, people who are together for whatever reason fall out and want to fix each other, that's when you and I get information about the inner goings on of the system.
Or a disgruntled person.
Disgruntled people. So that's where things will come out. If today VK Singh is disgruntled, or the defense ministry people are disgruntled, or somebody else is disgruntled, then that's where your leaks are coming. I'm not saying ABCD is leaked to be attributed to the army chief at the moment, but that's where the information comes. So to say per se motive, if you go by, then you'll never publish, because a motive is never above board. But what one has to check and corroborate is the accuracy of the facts that have been given to you.
Tell me, in your experience, when you read the Indian Express story last Wednesday on the troop movements, what was your reaction?
My reaction was, that there must have been something with those names, who were the bylines. The editor, Shekhar Gupta, and the other two, Ritu Sareen, and putting their names to that story, my reaction was, could not have been a plant. And therefore, yes, what you could have got wrong was because this had been in the air. Rediff had also done this earlier in March. Perhaps they overdid it in terms of complete page, and which, suppose it had been just an anchor, then you would not have been left with the impression, what was the army general up to? Was there the coup is not possible if you think rationally in India, given the decentralized command structure, and 800 soldiers marching to Delhi is not, it's not going to happen. but you were left with this niggling kind of feeling about the army. What things going on that should not be going on, given the background of the spat of the army chief with the defense ministry and the civilian authority, which had made people very, very unhappy. In India, it had not happened, in this kind of a scale. So, given that, but if you ask for my reaction would be that maybe was there an attempt to send a message to the defense ministry?
Well, it was the next day he was filing the case against.
The same day?
The same day.
Yeah.
And apparently he could have been fired, but once he filed the case, he could not be fired. So I think the timing was crucial of when these troop movements took place, and it was basically, in my understanding, it was basically saber rattling just to shake up the establishment, and I think he succeeded in that.
Yeah, so was it to give a message to the defense ministry that the army is with me, number one. And certainly there was distrust within the establishment to the extent to believe that he might get up to something. Otherwise 800 just exercise, people moving, is not going to create that kind of, though the government is now saying no panic, the story is not correct.
Well,
whatever be the truth of that, there are two sides to this.
I think the government's credibility at this point is not very high. I don't think people would believe them quite that easily. But tell me, what I'd really like to...
There are two things, here, that what was the upshot of that story? One upshot was about A.K. Antony, that he is in, his name was doing the rounds for possibility for Rashtrapati Bhavan, or in the eventuality of Dr. Manmohan Singh having to step down for whatever reason in that a future date, he would be the chosen one because he was trusted by Mrs. Sonia Gandhi. This is the way it was viewed. And now that would become much more difficult after the so-called mishandling of this whole affair by Defense Minister. Though I think he was very courageous when he said no sacking. There was one kind of courage, because he knew of the kind of reaction it could provoke within the armed forces. It would widen the gap between civilian authority and the army. So I think there was a certain kind of courage when Antony said, no, I don't want blood on my hands.
But Neerja,
second point I want to make, the other upshot is that it has stopped General V.K. Singh in his tracks. Suppose it was true that, hypothetically speaking, he was all ready to come out with more ammunition on corruption or whatever, he would think twice, because these niggling doubts have been raised of what he was about. So certainly the story achieved these two things, whatever be the purpose.
But what I really want to talk about is the reaction of the media to that story, and sort of very personal attacks on Indian Express and on Shekhar Gupta. Why was the rest of the media so negative?
Could be envy, it could be also disbelief that this was not possible, simply not possible, given the strong reaction of the government also. The story raised doubts about a force that has been in our country a nationalist force, the Indian Army. Now people know about the corruption and all that, but still to write a story which projected this kind of sentiment about the army moving away or cocking a snook at the civilian authority was not in the interest of the country or the country's security. There are a lot of people who felt that, and the army has been one of the nationalist forces, and it is.
Neerja, now if you look back at all the women journalists, I mean, so many women have reached the second position. And then when it comes to being made editor of the whole newspaper or news organization or editor-in-chief, it does not happen. It has not happened.
That's right. I think I think this is an area where I wish somebody would actually do a study, and a study which is made possible by honest expression of women journalists, of what actually did it, why they haven't made to the top, and what was it, did they draw these lines, these Lakshman Rekhas, beyond which they would not go because of, as I say, the cost to things they valued was very, very high.
I think it's
or is it now prejudice in the system?
That's also there. That's also there, because I haven't heard of a woman who's turned it down.
That is
And-
her side of the story. But from the system side, people who appoint the managements,
They haven't done
do
it.
they view women as less than, not less than capable, but not being able to take the pressures that the top job, the pressures, the loneliness, the kind of decision making called for that the top job would demand?
Do you think political analysts from the mainstream media failed to understand the undercurrents of the socio-political alignments and the new equations in the UP election?
I think Akhilesh Yadav was a fresh new face, and of course I must preface it by saying that there are the groups, committed vote banks of these parties, particularly the BSP and the Samajwadi Party, and these vote banks stuck to them. But there was a large floating voter also. Akhilesh Yadav caught the imagination of this floating voter and large number of younger people. I travelled with him in the weakest areas of Samajwadi Party, and I saw that enthusiasm. And people wanted a break from, those who wanted a break from Mayawati, went for him because he was the alternative, he was there. As for Rahul Gandhi, I didn't hear one negative note. I talked to every single person in UP when I travelled 4 times, and I asked them about people I conversed with about Rahul Gandhi, not one negative note about him. So, but they did not see him as the alternative because he was not going to be in Uttar Pradesh. They would say, if he would only come and be the chief ministerial candidate, we would vote for him. So,
do you think the mainstream media is actually disconnected from regional areas, from rural areas, from UP, from Bihar? Do you think the mainstream media goes there as tourists and comes back? They don't really have an understanding of what it's about right now, because it's changed so much.
I think that would be too much of a sweeping generalization. There'll be mainstream media and mainstream media. The Hindi channels I find more fascinating. They go into much more of the nitty-gritty in their analysis. Caste combinations, the local factors, the local personalities. Some of the English media tends to be at that, superficial level, will go only for personalities and track them.
That's what they did.
That's what they did, and therefore an appeal to a certain kind of clientele that is happy with the combativeness, the suspense of.
But wouldn't
but
the
not
same
really
clientele
want-
be happier seeing the real issues, seeing taking the political discourse to a larger picture? Somehow everything is being done, as you said, on a very superficial level, and since there is such a huge divide in terms of income, language, culture, education between mainstream and these areas, isn't it journalism's duty to actually bring all that into the mainstream media?
Oh, I agree with you absolutely. And these elections were a milestone. Uttar Pradesh was a milestone to understand the future politics that's going to pan out in the coming months. Certainly, I agree that we need to go much deeper into, much deeper into the analysis of why what happened. So, and that has been a disappointing story.
Thank you very much, Neerja.
Thank you.